Former Texas Governor Rick Perry has thrown his hat into the crowded GOP three-ring circus. He thinks that he's learned enough in the last 4 years to actually be a contender in the primaries. As a matter of fact, he's bought himself a new pair of black rim glasses to make us believe he's just a little smarter than most. Even if he avoids the stupid talk that sank his 2012 campaign, we have to remember that he wrote a book, Fed Up, which lays out all that stupid talk in black and white. Joining me to talk about that record is Howard Nations. Howard, I'm so grateful that Rick Perry is from Texas and not from Florida. It's not like we don't have enough buffoons here in Florida, but I think y'all are really at the front of the buffoon parade with this Rick Perry. Ian Millhiser did such a great job getting kind of his understanding of how crazy the brain of Rick Perry really is. Of course, you've been involved hands-on in top of the political game in Texas for decades. You've watched this guy come out of Crazyville, I guess. Give me your take on this crazy attitude he has about the Constitution. It's almost insane. The black glasses don't make him look any more intelligent where it comes to these discussions.
Well, Pap, Rick Perry is truly a constitutional scholar. I would say he's one of the great constitutional 12th century scholars in history. Perry, they collected in his book on Fed Up, Our Fight to Save America, he printed a bunch of his speeches that he made to the choir on his TV appearances. And according to his message, most of the 20th century in America was just a big constitutional mistake. His espoused beliefs are Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid are unconstitutional, despite the fact that the Constitution specifically permits the federal government to lay and collect taxes and provide for the common good, and that's where Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid.
Well, let's analyze this as we go forward. First of all, you're right. It's clear in the Constitution that is what the federal government is supposed to do. They call them police powers broadly, but it's health, safety, and welfare.
Right.
And when it comes to understanding constitutional analysis, when the court is looking at what the federal government does, they put one of the highest levels of review on the federal government's right to police powers, which is to improve health, safety, and welfare of the entire nation. Now, I'm not sure which Constitution he's reading or what he's relying on, but the first shot, when we come right out in his book, Fed Up, Our Fight to Save America from Washington, when he says, well, first of all, Social Security and Medicare are completely unconstitutional. Anybody with half a brain that has understood the Constitution at all understands that is exactly what the federal government's supposed to be doing. But go ahead with what else he thinks is unconstitutional.
It's not just that he thinks this is unconstitutional. He carries through on his beliefs. Perry followed through on this Medicaid as part of Obamacare. Texas is the largest uninsured health care population in the United States, yet Perry, because it was part of Obamacare, refused the Medicaid support at no cost to Texans for millions and millions of dollars. He then appointed a committee to study the problem, and the committee, after 2 years, came back and they concluded that Obamacare program of Medicaid was the best way to implement and solve the problem. Perry's response, whoops, literally. He thinks the Federal Clean Air Act is unconstitutional.
Well, first of all, let me back. It's worse than that. He wants to do away with the EPA. Yeah. He says the EPA is completely, utterly unconstitutional, that it's useless, that it makes the American public victims. And when he's asked the questions, okay, well, what happens when we have a corporation like the corporations that give you so much money, Mr. Perry? What happens when they pollute our streams, they pollute our air, and we have parts of the country that end up looking like Beijing, China? What do we do then? He has no answer other than to say, well, the system is set up to where we will always do the right thing where it comes to our neighbors.
Right.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, so he wants to do away with the EPA. He wants to do away with any laws that have to do with regulating health, safety, and welfare, dealing with the air we breathe and the water we drink. But go
Right.
ahead.
Protecting the rights of workers. He thinks that it's unconstitutional, or that the United States Supreme Court was wrong in upholding the National Labor Relations Act of 1935. Things that protect employment relationships, minimum wage, ban on child labor, provide collective bargaining rights. He wants to do away with all that, and that he thinks it was a mistake to provide it in the first place.
Yeah, and so we back up and say, why do we have it? Because we had workers that were working 15 hours, 16 hours a day, getting paid a whopping $11 for the entire day.
Yeah.
Why? Because there were no standards. People simply, it was a race to the bottom. Let's take any job we can get. There's no vacation. There are no benefits at all. It's a lineup, take the worst job you can. So along comes a labor board. And they said, we have a health, safety, and welfare issue in the United States. We have to solve it. We have the constitutional right to solve it. And therefore, you come in with the labor board, which has done tremendous things to improve labor in the country, although under this Obama administration and under the Bush administration, it has been a train wreck. And we've seen what's happened to labor. We've seen what's happened to the middle class as a result of demise of labor. But go ahead with what this genius from your state there in Texas believes he wants to visit on America if he becomes president.
Well, federal financial reform is unconstitutional. It's clear that Perry would broaden the Wall Street's free reign, and he'd do everything he could to roll back Dodd-Frank.
Okay, and we know what that's about. We saw it firsthand. Mom and pop pensions lost $3 trillion at the hands of Wall Street predators. Why? Because the senator from Texas, which is the same senator that helped Rick Perry get his start, by the way. I think it's very interesting to note that was a senator that did away with Glass-Steagall and in the process left us this train wreck disaster that was the last burn down. But in Perry's mind, we want to get away with doing away with SEC, doing away with any Wall Street regulations, because, as he puts it, what is his reason? That we just are all going to be able to take care of each other. That is right. Perry's naive view of the world.
Yeah, he also has no faith in voters. This is the Republican trait. He thinks the 17th Amendment was a mistake. That's the one that gave the voters the right to elect United States senators. Before that, there was a highly corrupt system of state legislatures electing United States senators. This is typical of both Republicans and specifically Perry. Perry, while he was governor, did everything he could to roll back the rights of minorities, the ability of minorities to vote, and for students to vote. He took some very strong action to try to close the polls in the voting booth to minorities and to students.
And of course, his fear is, we heard it in many of the private speeches that he gave, is that there's a demographic shift in the United States. He's afraid the Hispanic voters are going to nullify the impact of the WASP voters down there in Texas, the good old boy voters. They're not going to have a vote. So what does Perry come up with? When the ACLU looked at which state did the most to take away the right to vote, it was Rick Perry down in Texas. And they determined, based on what Rick Perry's own words are, that he was doing that because he knew the demographic shift was taking place, and the only way to stop this influx of new voters is to simply say, you may not vote. And that went to the elderly, that went to Hispanics, it went to African Americans, it went to students, where students couldn't even vote on their campus, which
right.
had been taking place for decades and decades down in Texas. But this is our presidential candidate, Perry, and I hate to say it again, from your town, your home. Well, is he from Houston, Texas?
He is not from Houston, Texas.
Well, at least you got that going. Okay, what else did this genius say in his book? Now that we're able to do a quick look back.
Okay,
got about a minute.
Well, okay, he's in favor of. He was opposed to taxing investment income. He thinks that should be unconstitutional, despite that the 16th Amendment overruled the Supreme Court opinion that said taxing income from capital was unconstitutional. In other words, he wants trust fund babies to pay no taxes on their income for life. But the big thing is his rant against the Supreme Court of the United States. He calls them, and not just the present one, but the whole history of them, he calls them the grand ayatollahs of the Constitution. They should not decide where we pray to God, when life begins, whether contraception should be sold, how to celebrate religious holidays, the allowable levels of pornography, same-sex marriage. He doesn't think any of these things should be decided by the Supreme Court. The allowable levels of discrimination, as if there's some magic line where you can discriminate and then above that you can't discriminate. Women in the military and the execution of criminals. None of those things should be decided by the United States Supreme Court. I think they should be decided by the governor of Texas.
Well, real quickly, let me just say this. When you had George Bush come out of Texas, we understood that was the dumbing down of the office of the presidency. Intelligence, intellect, sophistication, class, character no longer meant anything. We were going to go and we were going to reinvent this idea that we wanted to elect the guy we wanted to go have a damn beer with. So
Right.
now up comes Perry. He's like Bush on steroids, and that's what the system is with Republicans has experienced. It is a race to the bottom of stupidity. And Howard, I hate that you're having to live out there and listen and watch this unfold before your eyes. But thank you for what you do out
Well,
there.
let me tell you one more thing, and that is when Bush was here as governor and Perry was lieutenant governor, Bush was considered to be the bright one.
Okay. All right. Thanks a lot. Howard Nations.